And I make that they are. So, well, that's a good thing to come in on, Lord. Thank you very kindly out there. That is genuinely touching. I really appreciate it. So speaking of our back, first things first, let's manage our business. Things need to be done. So, Abbe once again managed to get first. That makes number 6. So, another mark on the board. Ooh. There we are. But yeah, always appreciate you showing up for these, and yeah, showing your dedication. What else? So, obviously, and also just to get big ups on the 30th streak. That's I mean, you literally have a bigger streak on these than I do. I was absent for at least one of these the last 30. So yeah, mad, genuinely incredible. But so first things first. Well, I guess there's a couple of things. So first, I haven't actually decided what we're going to read today. The plan is to do some short stories because I can't go super long tonight because I've got stuff to do tomorrow. Apparently there is some sort of solar alignment that is throwing off the balance of the wards, which is going to make things increasingly hot down here unless I go do a bunch of work. So that's fun. Got to go do that tomorrow. But we are going to do some short stories today. We've got a few options. Namely, we got these, which is some of the Melvilles, which are very legible, I'm sure. God, good design these. We got Poor Man's Pudding, Rich Man's Crumbs, Benito Serrano, and Iron My Chimney, all of which is reasonably short. We also got, well, there's Mr. Harrison's Confessions down there, but that's a full novel, so we're not probably doing that one there. We got a few ghost stories. I managed to go out and get another one. So we got Cast in the Ruins, The Stalls of Barchester Cathedral, and Mr. Humphrey and His Inheritance, all of them by M.R. James. Your standard ghost stories, and then there's not a close-up screen for them because I only have 2 of the close-up screens. But down below me, if you look down 6 shelves from where I am to the sort of collection of green and red books, there's 4 more of Oscar Wilde's slightly fucked up children's stories we could do. So if anyone has a particular preference for what we do today, I'm not particularly fussed. I'm sort of I don't know, I've been out of it today. So if anyone has a preference, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'll make a decision. But I don't mind too much either way. But before that, I have to do my little bit of airtime filling before 10 past the hour, so that lamp doesn't yell at me. I always said no badges today because I haven't got anything planned, so I haven't designed one. I do sort of like the idea of designing just a nothing badge for days where there's no other badges. Actually, that would be quite funny. But I don't think I can do like a passive ongoing badge. I think it would just be re-uploading the same one over and over again, so you get like a dozen copies of it after a while. So that'd be annoying. So I won't do that. But yeah, so no badges today. And we've covered all of the areas of the library that are publicly listed, from residential and office buildings at the top, down through the dead stacks right down on floor 65. And I've been told in no uncertain terms that I'm not allowed to talk about the other floors that I'm not supposed to know about, so we won't be doing that. So my plan now is to start talking a bit more about some of the beasts that's down here. Hey Nazca! You haven't missed anything, we're just doing the intro stuff. I did mention I've got 3 sort of choices for stories today. We're just doing short ones. I don't particularly mind which we do, so if you've got an interest between ghost stories, the slightly fucked up kid stories of Oscar Wilde, and some more Herman Melville, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, yeah. But yeah, so airtime filling, beasts, yes, that stuff. So, like I said when we talked about the lab floors, the sort of deep labs, the beast is mostly a combination of stuff that come out of the 4 types of labs, the sort of alchemy, gyromancy, carnomancy, and demonic summoning labs. And so mostly they sort of amalgamations of that sort, some combination of those sort of things. Sometimes it's more than 2 of them, sometimes it's just the 2, but they come out in sort of all different ways. There's not really one sort of strict form that they take, but there are a few general categories, and then there's a few specific sort of notable beasts. And I don't really. It occurred to me while I was thinking how to do this. I've never really sat down and sort of put pen and paper on, you know, the broader categories of them, because there's like an ecology of them that some of them sort of follow. I don't want to like half-ass this because this is, you know, a thing that I'm sort of actually interested in. So I'll think over the coming days, sort of try and get more of a proper art before I do those. So I'm going to start with the more interesting individual beasts. And the first one I'll start with is the Whistler, who I've mentioned before, the Whistler, a couple of times. And he is a fucking prick. I hate him. He is my least favourite of the beasts, which is saying something because all the beasts try to kill and eat me. That's just their default state of being. But him in particular I dislike because he is sort of methodical, is the thing. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he is in terms of things. I think he's probably a little bit of everything. Because he has a vaguely sort of humanoid form, like he stands on two legs, has two arms, looks like a person in like the broad outline of it. Which is generally an indication that he would be a golem originally, because the carnomantic things don't have bones in them, so there's no sort of natural form for that. But he does have like flesh, and what even looks like skin, which I can only imagine he's either some sort of alchemical stuff, or that whatever demon is possessing him is sort of driving him out. Now he's definitely possessed by a demon, because he's too intelligent to just be a golem or a construct that's gone wrong. He is... I mean, the reason I hate him is because he's methodical, right? Like most of the beasts is just aggressive. They'll try and kill you if they see you, they'll go after you, but they aren't smart. You know, you can get out of their line of sight and they'll lose track of you, lose interest. I don't think about things, they don't understand the terrain. But he is... I mean, he's smart, like, he's... I mean, that's the biggest thing about him, he is slow, he's methodical, he looks for things. He likes to go through the books sort of one by one, pull them out, look at them, go through them. And he knows that this place exists, like the little library. He can't get in here because of the wards, but he knows about it. He'll come by sometimes, and I have to hide, because if he sees me in here, then he probably won't go away. But yeah, anyway, like I said, he's sort of vaguely humanoid. But you wouldn't mistake him for a human. He's too, long, I think you'd say. Tall, I guess tall would be the right word for a person, but it feels wrong for him. It's hard to say how tall he is exactly. He stands probably about 7 feet. But he's never, like, stood upright, you know what I mean? The way he walks is always sort of... Not even hunched is the right word, because he doesn't really bend the back. But it's like his legs, and he sort of crumples in a bit on himself. And his legs bend the wrong way, I should say. That he walks deteriorated, so back with bended knees. But yeah, I suspect if he was to sort of stretch himself all the way, he'd be nearer 9 feet than 7. He stands about 7 when he moves around. And well, what else was there to say about him? I mean, he's most of his proportions is roughly around the size of a like normal human, like in terms of like chest size and all that, which makes him look very skinny because he's too tall for it. But like most of the proportions is that, except for the head. The head is bigger, like maybe not quite twice as big as a person's, but especially around the face. There's something uncanny about like big, right? Big teeth, big eyes, big nose, the whole thing. And he has got hair, but only like little wisps of it on the head, none on the body. And you can tell because he doesn't. Let's not say. Well, I was about to say he doesn't wear clothes. That's not true. Sometimes he'll wear a jacket of some sort. Not always the same one. Like he'll get them somewhere, he'll pick them up somewhere, and they don't fit him because he's too tall, obviously, and they sort of tend to get ripped off him at some point. So he'll go through them and they'll get damaged. But that's all he'll wear, which, I mean, it's unsettling, really. It's sort of like the how'd you put it? The sort of illusion of wearing clothes, not illusion. Acknowledgement, right? You understand the importance, right? He's paying lip service to it, basically. It'd probably be more upsetting, sort of in a visceral way, but he doesn't have a lot of what you call features, right? Like he's basically, how'd you put it? Not smooth. He's crumpled, but there's no features to him. He's just, oh hey, Wild, good to have you. Yeah, no problem. But he's There's nothing distinct about him, right? Like, all of his skin is his skin, right? There's no moles, there's no hairs, there's no orifices or anything. It's just there. Even his eyes is wrong. Like, he has them, but he doesn't blink. I don't even really think he has eyelids. I'm not even sure he sees out of them. He doesn't really look with them. I sort of get a sense that his nose is how he gets around mostly. I'm not sure if that's by sense of smell or if there's like some sort of sight organ actually in there, and the bigger eyes is just a distraction. But yeah, he just wanders around, his arms sort of hanging down around his knees, going through the books, and like I say, for his name, whistling. Always whistling. And not even like a sort of passive, like, you know, wind whistling, like tuneless. No, it's like a deliberate pattern to it. It's not like a tune, it's not rhythmic enough to still always be one tune, but there's... I mean, the thing that gets you about him is, he's clearly sentient in some way. He's an intelligent creature. But only sometimes. He doesn't show it, he doesn't act like it all the time. He just passively lumbers. There's just enough in him that it tells you he's aware of things. That he could get you if you don't pay attention. And of course he lingers, which is a pain in the arse. So yeah, that's the Whistler. He is my least favourite beast. And of all the like particular singular ones, it's probably the one I run into the most. Which is why I bring him up first. But yeah, that's enough of that though. I think we've reached our quota. I don't think I've got too much more to say about him. So let's be having it. Does anyone have a preference on which story we do? Going to give you a sort of 30 seconds to type out a message. If you do, I'll have a quick drink. Oh, I will say again, there have been some changes to the wards lately. Shouldn't be anything that should have changed too much today, but if you do notice any audio issues, let me know. I'm always aware it can change. But yeah, I'm getting the sense that no one has a particular preference for story, which is fair enough. In which case, I think we will head back to the ghost stories. Not these ones, because I've been a little bit leery about the ghost stories, because last time we did one, the whole incident happened with the a guy in the book, which I'm still not super happy about it. And I've been a little shy of them, but we know what went wrong. Like nowadays, Lamp figured it out. There's been security, well, there's been things put in place to make sure it don't happen again. So I don't want to, I don't want to worry about it. So we're going to get back into it and we're going to tackle it. I'm going to push on through. So, without further ado, we'll do some M.R. James. And we'll start with the Casting of the Runes, which... actually, you can see now, I'll do a little mention of this. The Casting of the Runes is sort of formatted slightly differently than most of them, same way that the Tractor's Midoff was. And Lamp reckons that is an indication that this particular volume has been imbued with some level of power, basically. It's a screamy book, though, a low-level one. It's not enough magic in it to be like a magical object, really, like in and of itself. But there's some energy in it, which is, like I said, these come from like the low levels, or the upper levels of the library where the stuff for training magicians is. So it was probably meant for sort of sensing and interacting with energies in a less dangerous way. But obviously, the thing in the book was able to use them there, sort of advance its purposes. So this one might have a bit of funky energy in it, but Lamp's put one of his binding nails into it. So that should all be contained and it should be able to be used against us. But if you feel something a bit weird while we're doing this, if your hair's down the end or whatever, that'll be why. But yeah, as always, if while I'm reading this you happen to miss something, or I've stumbled over something, or the stream skips, or any other reason you need me to go back over something, do feel free to let me know. I'm always happy to do so. If you have thoughts, comments, questions, happy to feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to stop. This one is... How long is this one? I don't think it's super long. Let's see. This one is... it's 33 pages, so... Maybe we'll stop partway through and do a little bit of talking and commentary. Oh, congratulations on the 5-stream street, Wild. I genuinely appreciate it. It's always good to have you here. Okay, I'll have another drink. I guess it is time to party after all. One day I'll find some alcohol down there. Some of these wizards have to have some stashed. Anyway. But yeah. So it's 33 pages, probably stop about halfway through to have a sip of water and maybe make some comments. We'll see how we feel. I sort of have like doing more commentary after the book rather than partway through it, so we'll see. But yeah. Other than that, we'll see how we get on with it. See how we feel after it. Maybe we'll do another one, maybe not. But yeah. But without any further ado, let's begin. Cast in the Runes. April 15th, 1900X. Dear Sir, I am requested by the Council of the Blank Association to return to you the draft of a paper on the truth of alchemy, which you have been good enough to offer to read at our forthcoming meeting, and to inform you that the Council do not see their way to including it in the programme. I am yours faithfully, Blank Secretary. April 18th. Dear Sir, I am sorry to say that my engagements do not permit my affording you an interview on the subject of your proposed paper. Nor do our laws allow of your discussing the matter with a committee of our Council, as you suggest. Please allow me to assure you that the fullest consideration will be given to the draft which you submitted, and that it will not decline without having been referred to the judgment of the most competent authority. No personal question, it can hardly be necessary for me to add, and I had the slightest influence on the decision of the Council. Believe me, with Supra, April 20th. The Secretary of the Blank Association begs respectfully to inform Mr. Carswell that it is impossible for him to communicate the name of any person or persons to whom the draft of Mr. Carswell's paper may have been submitted, and further desires to intimate that he cannot undertake to reply any further letters on this subject. And who is Mr. Carswell? Inquired the Secretary's wife. She had called at his office and, perhaps unwarrantably, had picked up the last of these 3 letters which the typist had just brought in. Why, my dear, just at present Mr. Carswell is a very angry man, but I don't know much about him otherwise, except that he is a person of wealth. His address is Lufford Abbey, Warwickshire, and he's an alchemist apparently, and wants to tell us all about him. And that's about all, except that I don't want to meet him for the next week or 2. Now if you're ready to leave this place, I am. What have you been doing to make him angry? Asked Mrs. Secretary. The usual thing, my dear, the usual thing. He sent in a draft to a paper he wanted to read at the next meeting, and we referred it to Edward Dunning, almost the only man in England who knows about these things, and he said it was perfectly hopeless, so he declined it. So Carswell has been pelting me with letters ever since. The last thing he wanted was the name of the man we referred his nonsense to. You saw my answer to that. But don't you say anything about it, for goodness sakes. I should think not indeed. Did I ever do such a thing? I do hope, though, he won't get to know that it was poor Mr. Dunning. Poor Mr. Dunning? I don't know why you call him that. He's a very happy man, is Dunning. Lots of hobbies, and a comfortable home, and all his time to himself. I only meant I should be sorry for him if this man got hold of his name and came and bothered him. Oh, yes. I dare say he would be poor Mr. Dunning then. The Secretary and his wife were lunching out, and the friends to whose house they were bound were Warwickshire people. So Mrs. Secretary had already settled it in her own mind that she would have questioned them judiciously about Mr. Carswell. But she was saved the trouble of leading up to the subject, for the hostess said to the host before many minutes had passed, I saw the Abbot of Lufford this morning. The host whistled. Did you? What in the world brings him up to town? Goodness knows. He was coming out of the British Museum gate as I drove past. It was not unnatural that Mrs. Secretary should inquire whether this were a real abbot who were being spoken of. Oh, no, my dear. Only a neighbour of ours out in the country, who bought Lufford Abbey a few years ago. His real name is Carswell. Is he a friend of yours? Asked Mrs. Secretary, with a private wink, or asked Mr. Secretary, free with a private wink to his wife. A question let loose a torrent of declamation. There were really nothing to be said for Mr. Carswell. Nobody knew what he did with himself. His servants were an horrible set of people. He had invented a new religion for himself, and practically no one could tell what appalling rites. He was very easily offended, and never forgave anybody. He had a dreadful face, so the lady insisted, her husband somewhat demurring. He never did a kind action, and whatever influence he did exert were mischievous. Do the poor man justice, dear, her husband interrupted. You forget the treat he gave the school children. Forget it indeed. I'm glad you mentioned it, because it gives me an idea of the man. Now, Florence, listen to this. The first winter he was at Luffield, this delightful neighbour of ours wrote to the clergyman of his parish. He's not ours, but we know him very well, and offered to show the school children some magic lantern slides. He said he had some new kinds which he thought would interest them. Well, the clergyman was rather surprised, because Mr. Carswell had shown himself inclined to be unpleasant to the children, complaining of their trespassing or something of the sort. But of course he accepted, and the evening was fixed, and our friend went himself to see that everything went right. He said he had never been so thankful for anything as that his own children were all prevented from being there. They were at a children's party at our house, as a matter of fact, because this Mr. Carswell had evidently set out with the intention of frightening these poor village children out of their wits, and I do believe if he had been allowed to go on, he would have actually done so. He began with some comparatively mild things. Red Riding Hood was one of them, and even then, Mr. Farratt said, all was so dreadful that several of the smaller children had to be taken out. And he said Mr. Carswell began the story by producing a noise like a wolf howling in the distance, which was the most gruesome thing he had ever heard. All the slides he showed, Mr. Farrier said, were most clever. They were absolutely realistic, and when he had got them, or how he worked them, he could not imagine. Well, the show went on, and the stories kept on becoming a little more terrifying each time, and the children were mesmerized into complete silence. At last, he produced a series which represented a little boy passing through his own park, Lufford, in the evening. Every child in the room could recognize the place from the pictures. And this poor boy was followed, and at last pursued and overtaken, and either torn in pieces or somehow made away with, by a horrid hopping creature in white, which you saw first sticking about among the trees. Gradually it appeared more and more plainly. Mr. Farrier said it gave him one of the worst nightmares he ever remembered, and what it must have meant to the children doesn't bear thinking of. Of course, this was too much, and he spoke very sharply indeed to Mr. Carswell, and said it couldn't go on. All he said was, "Oh, you think it's time to bring out our little show to an end and send them home to their beds? Very well." And then, if you please, he switched on another slide, which showed a great mass of snakes, centipedes, and disgusting creatures with wings, and somehow or other he made it seem as if they were climbing out of the picture and getting in amongst the audience. And this was accompanied by a sort of dry rustling noise which sent the children nearly mad, and of course they stampeded. A good many of them were rather hurt in getting out of the room, and I don't suppose one of them closed an eye that night. There was the most dreadful trouble in the village afterwards. Of course the mothers threw a good part of the blame on poor Mr. Farrier, and if they could have got past the gates, I believe the fathers would have broken every window in the abbey. Well, now that's Mr. Carswell. That's the Abbot of Luffield, my dear, and you can imagine how we covet his society. Yes, I think he has all the possibilities of distinguished criminal, has Carswell, said the host. I should be sorry for anyone who got in his bad books. Is he the man, or am I mixing him up with someone else? Asked the secretary, who for some minutes had been wearing the frown of the man who was trying to recollect something. Is he the man who brought out a history of witchcraft some time back? 10 years or more. That's the man. Do you remember the reviews of it? Certainly I do. What's equally to the point, I knew the author of the most inclusive of the lot. So did you. You must remember John Harrington. He was at John's in our time. Oh, very well indeed. I don't think I saw or heard anything of him between the time I went down and the day I read the account of the inquest on him. Inquest? Said one of the ladies. What has happened to him? Why, what happened is that he fell out of a tree and broke his neck. The puzzle was what could have induced him to get up there. It was a mysterious business, I must say. He was the man, not an athletic fellow, was he? And with no eccentric twist about him that was ever noticed. Walking home along a country road late in the evening, no tramps about, well known and liked in the place, and he suddenly begins to run like mad, loses his hat and stick, and finally shins up a tree, quite a difficult tree, growing in the hedgerow. A dead branch gives way and he comes down with it and breaks his neck. And there he is found next morning with the most dreadful face of fear on him that could be imagined. It was pretty evident, of course, that he had been chased by something, and people talked of savage dogs and beasts escaped out of menageries. There was nothing to be made out of that. It was in '89, and I believe his brother Henry, whom I remember well as Cambridge, but you probably don't, has been trying to get on the track of an explanation ever since. He, of course, insists there was malice in it, but I don't know. It's difficult to see how it could have come in. After a time, the talk reverted to the history of witchcraft. Did you ever look into it? Asked the host. Yes, I did, said the secretary. I went so far as to read it. Was it as bad as everyone made it out to be? Oh, in point of style and form, quite hopeless. It deserved all the pulverising it got. But beside that, it were an evil book. The man believed every word of what he was saying, and I'm very much mistaken if he hadn't tried the greater part of his recipes. Well, I only remember Harrington's review of it, and I must say if I'd been the author, I would have quenched my literary ambition for good. I should never have held up my head again. It hadn't had that effect in the present case, but of course it's 3:30, I must be off. On the way home, the secretary's wife said, I do hope that horrible man won't find out that Mr. Dunning had anything to do with the rejection of his paper. I don't think there's much chance of that, said the secretary. Dunning won't mention it himself, for these matters are confidential, and none of us will for the same reason. Carswell won't know his name, for Dunn hasn't published anything on the same subject yet. The only danger is that Carswell might find out if he was to ask the British Museum people who was in the habit of consulting alchemical manuscripts. I can't very well tell them not to mention Dunning, can I? It would set them talking at once. Let's hope it won't occur to him. However, Mr. Carswell were an astute man. This much is in the way of a prologue. On an evening rather later in the same week, Mr. Edward Dunham were returning from the British Museum, where he'd be engaged in research, to the comfortable house in a suburb where he lived alone, tended by two excellent women who had been long with him. There is nothing to be added by way of description of him to what we have heard already. Let's follow him as he takes his sober course homeward. A train took him to within a mile or two of his house, and an electric tram a stage further. The line ended at a point some 300 yards from his front door. He had had enough of reading when he got into the car, and indeed the light were not such as to allow him to do more than study the advertisements on the panes of glass that faced it, as he sat. As were not unusual, the advertisements in this particular line of cars were objects of his frequent contemplation, and with the possible exception of the brilliant and convincing dialogue between Mr. Lamplow and an eminent K.C. on the subject of prayer saline, none of them afforded much scope for his imagination. I'm wrong. There was one at the corner of the car furthest from him which did not seem familiar. It was in blue letters on yellow ground, and all that he could read of it was a name, John Harrington, and something like a date. It could be of no interest to him to know more, but for all that, as the car emptied, he was just curious enough to move along the seat until he could read it well. He felt to a slight extent repaid for his trouble. The advertisement were not of the usual type. It ran thus: in memory of John Harrington, FSA, of the Laurels, Ashbrook, died September 18th, 1889. 3 months was allowed. The car stopped. Mr. Dunning, still contemplating the blue letters on the yellow ground, had to be stimulated aroused by a word from the conductor. I beg your pardon, he said. I was looking at the advertisement. It's a very odd one, isn't it? The conductor read it slowly. But my word, he said. I've never seen that one before. Well, there is a cure in it. Someone been up there jokes here, I should think. He got out a duster, and applied it, not without saliva, with a pane, and then to the outside. No, said returning. There ain't no transfer. Seems to me as it were regular in the glass. But I mean the substance, as you may say. Don't you think so, sir? Mr. Dunning examined it, and rubbed it with his glove, and agreed. He looks after these advertisements, and gives leave for them to be put up. I wish you would inquire, or just take note of the words. At this moment there came a call from the driver. Look alive, George, time's up. All right. There's something else up at this end. You come and look at this here glass. What going on with a glass? Said the driver, approaching. Well, and who's Harrington? And what all about it? They were just asking who was responsible for putting the advertisement up. I was just asking who was responsible for putting up the advertisements in your cars, and saying it would be as well to make some inquiry about this one. Well, sir, I told on the company office that workers. It's our man Tim, it's our Mr. Timms, I believe, who looks into that. When we put up tonight, I'll leave the word, and perhaps he'll be able to tell you tomorrow, if you happen to be coming this way. This is all that passed the evening. Mr. Dunham did just go to the trouble of looking up Ashbrook, and found that it were in Warwickshire. Next day he went to town again. The car, with the same car, were too full in the morning while Owl was getting a word with the conductor. You could only be sure that the curious advertisement had been made away with. The close of the day brought a further element of mystery into the transaction. He had missed the tram, or else preferred walking home, but at a rather late hour, while he was at work in his study, one of the maids come to say that two men from the tramways was very anxious to speak with him. This was a reminder of the advertisement, which he had, he says, nearly forgotten. He had the men in. They was the conductor and the driver of the car. And when the matter of refreshment had been attended to, asked what Mr. Timms had to say about the advertisement. Well, sir, that's what we took the liberty of a step round about, said the conductor. Mr. Timms, he gave William here the rough side of his tongue about it, according to him. There weren't no advertisements of that description said, nor ordered, nor paid for, nor put up, nor nothing, let alone not being there, and we was playing the fool, taking up his time. Well, I says, if that's the case, I ask you, Mr. Timms, I says, is to take a look at it for yourself, I says. Of course, if it ain't there, I says, you may take and call me what you like. Right, he says, I will, and we went straight off. Now, I'll leave it to you, sir, if that ad, as we term and with Harrington on it, weren't as plain as anything you see, anything. Blue letters on yellow glass. And as I says at the time, when you bore me out, regular in the glass. Because if you remember, you recollected me swabbing it with my duster. To be sure, I do quite clearly. Well, you may swear well, I don't think, Mr. Timms, he gets in that car with a light. No, he told William to hold the light outside. Now, he says, where's your precious ad, what we've heard so much about? Here it is, I says, Mr. Timms, and I laid down my hand on it. The conductor paused. Well, said Mr. Dunham. It was gone, I suppose, broken. Broken? Not it. There weren't, if you believe me, no more trace of them letters. Blue letters there was, in that piece of glass, and, well, it's no good me talking. I never see such a thing. I'll leave it to William here. But there, as I says, where's the benefit of me going on about it? And what did Mr. Timms say? I did what I gave him leave to do. Called us pretty much anything he liked. And I don't know as I blame him so much neither. But what we thought, William and me did, as we was seen you take down a bit of note about them, well, that letter in. I certainly did that, and I have it now. Did you wish me to speak with Mr. Timms myself and show it to him? Was that what you came about? Didn't I say as much, said William. Deal with a gent as if you can, get up the tracks of one, that's my word. Now perhaps, George, you'll allow I ain't took you very far wrong tonight. Very well, William, very well. And then I need you to go on as if you hadn't frog-marched me yet. I come quiet, didn't I? All the same for that, but you hadn't ought to take up your time all this way, sir. But if it so happened you could find time to step round to the company's office in the morning and tell Mr. Timms what you seen for yourself, we should lay under a very obligation for your trouble. You see, it ain't being called, well, one thing or another as we mind, but if they got in the head that at the office we seen things that weren't there, why, one thing leads to another, and where we should be a 12 months hence, where? You understand what I mean. Amid further elucidations of the proposition, George, conducted by William, left the room. The incredulity of Mr. Timms, who had a nodding acquaintance with Mr. Dunham, were greatly modified on the following day by what the latter could tell to show him, and any bad marks that might have been attached to the names of William and George were not suffered to remain on the company's books. Explanation there were none. Mr. Dunham's interest in the matter was kept alive by an incident of the following afternoon. He was walking from his club to the train, and he noticed some way ahead a man with an handful of leaflets, such as is distributed to passengers by agents of enterprising firms. This agent had not chosen a very crowded street for his operation. In fact, Mr. Dunham did not see him get rid of a single leaflet before he himself reached the spot. One was thrust into his hand as he passed. The hand that gave it touched his, and he expected a sort of little shock as it did. It seemed unnaturally rough and not. He looked in passing at the giver, but the impression he got was so unclear that, however much he tried to reckon it up as subsequently, nothing would come. He was walking quickly, and as he went on glanced at the paper, it were a blue one. The name of Harrington in large capitals caught his eye. He stopped, startled, and felt for his glasses. The next instant, the leaflet were twitched out of his hand by a man who hurried past, and were irrecoverably gone. He ran back a few paces, but where were the passer-by? And where were the distributor? It were in a somewhat pensive frame of mind that Mr. Dunham passed on the following day into the select manuscripts room of the British Museum and filled up tickets for Harley 3586 and some other volumes. After a few minutes they was brought to him, and he was settling the one he wanted first upon the desk when he thought he heard his own name whispered behind him. He turned round hastily and, in doing so, brushed his little portfolio of loose papers onto the floor. He saw no one he recognised except one of the staff in charge of the room, who nodded to him, and he proceeded to pick up his papers. He thought he had them all and would turn in to begin his work, when a stout gentleman at the table behind him, who had just risen to leave and had collected his own belongings, touched him on the shoulder, saying, "May I give you this? I think it should be yours." And handed him a missing quart. "It is mine, thank you," said Mr. Dunnins. In another moment the man had left the room. Upon finishing his work for the afternoon, Mr. Dunnins had some conversation with the assistant in charge, and took occasion to ask who the stout gentleman was. "Oh, he's a man named Carswell," said the assistant. "He was asking me weeks ago who were the great authorities on alchemy, and of course I told him you were the only one in the country. I'll see if I can't catch him. He'd like to meet you, I'm sure." "For heaven's sake, don't dream of it," said Mr. Dunham. "I'm particularly anxious to avoid him." Very well," said the assistant. "He doesn't come here often. I dare say you won't meet him." More than once on the way home that day, Mr. Dunham confessed to himself that he did not look forward with his usual cheerfulness to a solitary evening. It seemed to him that something ill-defined and impalpable had stepped in between him and his fellow men, had taken him in charge, as it were. He wanted to sit close up to his neighbours in the train and in the tram, but as luck would have it, in both train and car were markedly empty. The conductor George was thoughtful and appeared to be absorbed in calculations as to the number of passengers. On arriving at his house, he found Dr. Watson, his medical man, on his doorstep. I've had to upset your household arrangements, I'm sorry to say, Dunning. Both your servants hors de combat. In fact, I've had to send them to the nursing home." "Good heavens, what is the matter?" It's something like ptomaine poisoning, I should think. You've not suffered yourself, I can see, or you wouldn't be walking about. I think they'll pull through all right." "Dear, dear. Have you any idea what has brought it on?" "Well, they tell me they brought some shellfish from a hawker at their dinner time. It's odd. I've made inquiries, but I can't find that any hawker has been to other houses in the street. I couldn't send word to you. I won't be back for a bit yet. You come and dine with me tonight anyhow, and we can make arrangements for going on. 8 o'clock, don't be too anxious." The solitary evening was thus obviated. At the expenses and distress and inconvenience, it's true, Mr. Dunham spent the time pleasantly enough with the doctor, a rather recent settler, and returned to his lonely home about 11:30. The night he passed is not one on which he looks back with any satisfaction. He were in bed and the light were out. He was wondering if the chairwoman would come early enough to get him hot water next morning, when he heard the unmistakable sound of his study door opening. No step followed it on the passage floor, but the sound must mean mischief, for he knew that he had shut the door that evening after putting his papers away in his desk. It were rather shame than courage that induced him to slip out into the passage and lean over the banister in his nightgown, listening. No light was visible, no further sound came, only a gust of warm or even hot air played for an instant round his shins. He went back and decided to lock himself into his room. There was more unpleasantness, however. Either an economical suburban company had decided their light would not be required in the small hours and had stopped working, or something was wrong with the meter. The effect were, in any case, that the electric lights was off. The obvious course was to find a match, and also to consult his watch. He might as well know how many hours of discomfort awaited him. So he put his hand into the well-known nook under the pillow, only it did not get so far. What he touched was, according to his account, a mouth with teeth and with hair about it, and, he declares, not the mouth of a human being. I do not think it is any use to guess what he said or did, but you're in a spare room with the door locked, and his ear to it before it were clearly conscious again, and there he spent the rest of a most miserable night, looking every moment for some fumbling at the door, but nothing come. The venturing back to his own room in the morning were attended with many listenings and quiverings. The door stood open, fortunately, and the blinds was up. The servants had been out of the house before the hour of drawing them down. There was, to be sure, no trace of an inhabitant. The watch too were in its usual place. Nothing was disturbed, only the wardrobe door had swung open, in accordance with his confirmed habit. A ring at the back door now announced the charwoman, who had been ordered the night before, and nerved Mr. Dunning, after letting her in, to continue his search in other parts of the house. They were equally fruitless. I'm going to pause here briefly to have a swallow of water. Pressing on. The day thus begun went on dismally enough. He dared not go to the museum. In spite of what the assistant had said, Carswell might turn up there, and Dunham felt he could not cope with a probably hostile stranger. His own house were odious. He hated sponging on the doctor. He spent some little time in a call at the nursing home, where he was slightly cheered by a good report of his housekeeper and maid. Toward lunchtime he betook himself to his club, again experiencing a gleam of satisfaction at seeing the secretary of the association. At luncheon, Dunning told his friend the more material of his woes, but could not bring himself to speak of those that weighed most heavily on his spirit. "My poor dear man," said the secretary, "what an upset. Look here. We're alone at home, absolutely. You must put up with us. Yes, no excuse. Send your things in this afternoon." Dunham were unable to stand out. He were, in truth, becoming acutely anxious, as the hours went on, as to what that night might have been waiting for him. He was almost happy as he hurried home to pack up. His friends, when they had time to take stock of him, were rather shocked at his lorn appearance, and did their best to keep him up at the mark. Not altogether without success, but, when the two men were smoking alone later, Dunham became dull again. Suddenly he said, "Gayton, I believe that alchemist man knows it was I who got his paper rejected." Gayton whistled. "What makes you think that?" he said. Dunham told of his conversation with the museum assistant, and Gayton could only agree that the guess seemed likely to be correct. "Not that I care much," Dunham went on, "only it might be a nuisance if we were to meet. He's a bad-tempered party, I imagine." Conversation dropped again. Gayton became more and more strongly impressed with the desolateness that came over Dunning's face and bearing, but finally, though with a considerable effort, he asked him point blank whether something serious was bothering him. Dunham gave an exclamation of relief. "I was perishing to get it off my mind," he said. "Do you know anything about a man named John Harrington?" Gayton was thoroughly startled, and at the moment could only ask why. Then the complete story of Dunham's experiences come out. What happened in the tram car, in his own house, and in the street. The trouble and the spirit that crept over him, and still held him. And he ended with the question he had begun with. Gayton were at a loss how to answer him. To tell the story of Harrington's end would perhaps be right, only Dunham were in a nervous state. The story were a grim one, and he could not help asking himself whether there were not a connecting link between these two cases, in the person of Carswell. It was a difficult conversation for a scientific man, but it could be eased by the phrase hypnotic suggestion. In the end he decided that the answer denied should be guarded. He had talked the situation over with his wife, so he said that he had known Harrington at Cambridge, and he believed he died suddenly in 1889, adding a few details about the man and his published work. He did not talk over the matter with Mrs. Gayton, and, as he had anticipated, she leapt at once to the conclusion which had been of him before him. It was she who reminded me of the surprising brother, Henry Harrington, and she also suggested that he might be got hold of by means of their hostess the day before. "He might be a hopeless crank," objected Garrett. "That could be the same from the Bennets, who know him," Mrs. Gayton retorted, and she undertook to see the Bennets the very next day. It is not necessary to tell further detail the steps by which Emery Arrington and Dunham was brought together. The next scene that does require to be narrated is a conversation that took place between the two. Dunham had told Arrington of the strange ways in which the dead man's name had been brought before him, and had said something besides of his own subsequent experiences. Then he had asked if Arrington was disposed, in return, to recall any of the circumstances connected with his brother's death. Arrington's surprise at what he heard can only be imagined, but his reply was readily given. "John," he said, "was in a very odd state, undeniably from time to time during some weeks before, though not immediately before, the catastrophe. There were several things. The principal notion he had was that he thought he was being followed. No doubt he was an impressionable man, but he never had such fancies as this before. I cannot get it out of my mind that there was ill will at work, and what you tell me about yourself reminds me very much of my brother. Can you think of any possible connecting link?" "There's just one that has been taking shape vaguely in my mind. I've been told that your brother reviewed a book very severely not long before he died, and just lately I have happened to cross the path of the man who wrote that book in a way he would resent. Don't tell me the man was called Carswell. Why not? That is exactly his name." Emery Arrington leant back. "That is final to my mind. Now I must explain further. From something he said, I feel sure my brother John was beginning to believe, very much against his will, that Carswell was at the bottom of his trouble. I want to tell you that what seems to me to have a bearing on the situation. My brother was a great musician, and used to run up to concerts in town. He came back, 3 months before he died, from one of these, and gave me his program to look at. An analytical program. He always kept them. I nearly missed this one, he said. I suppose I must have dropped it. Anyhow, I was looking for it under my seat and in my pockets and so on, and my neighbour offered me his, and said, might he give it to me? He had no further use for it, and he went away just afterwards. I don't know who he was, a stout, clean-shaven man. I should have been sorry to miss it. Of course I could never have brought another, but this cost me nothing. At another time he told me he had been very uncomfortable both on the way to his hotel and during the night. I piece things together now in thinking it over. Then, not very long after, he was going over these programs, putting them in order to have them bound up, and in this particular one, which by the way I had hardly glanced at, he found quite near the beginning a strip of paper with some very odd writing on it, in red and black, most carefully done. It looked to me more like runic letters than anything else. Why, he said, this must belong to my fat neighbour. It looks as if it might be worth returning to him. It may be a copy of something. Evidently someone has taken trouble over it. How can I find his address? We talked it over for a little, and agreed that it wasn't worth advertising about, and that my brother had better look out for the man at the next concert, to which he was going very soon. The paper was lying on the book, and we were both by the fire. It was a cold, windy summer evening. I suppose the door blew open, though I didn't notice it. At any rate, a gust, a warm gust it was, came quite suddenly between us, took the paper and blew it straight into the fire. It was light, thin paper, and flared and went up in the chimney in a single ash. Well, I said, you can't give it back now. He said nothing for a minute, and rather crossly, no, I can't. But why should you keep on saying so, I don't know. I remarked that I didn't say it more than once. Not more than 4 times, you mean, was all he said. I remember all that very clearly, without any good reason. And now to come to the point. I don't know if you looked at that book of Carswell's, which my unfortunate brother reviewed. It's not likely that you should have, but I did, both before his death and after it. The first time we made a game of it together. It was written in no style at all, split infinitives and every sort of thing that makes an Oxford gorge rise. Then there was nothing that the man didn't swallow, mixing up classical myths and stories out of the Golden Legend with reports of savage customs of today. All very proper, no doubt, if you know how to use them, but he didn't. He seemed to have the Golden Legend and the Golden Bough exactly on par, and to believe both. A pitiable exhibition, in short. Well, after the misfortune, I looked over the book again. It was no better than before, but the impression which it left this time on my mind was different. I suspected, as I told you, But Carswell had borne ill will to my brother, even that he was in some way responsible for what had happened. And now his book seemed to me a very sinister performance indeed. One chapter in particular struck me, in which he spoke of casting the runes on people, either for the purpose of gaining their affection, or of getting them out of the way, perhaps more especially the latter. He spoke of all this in a way that really seemed to me to imply actual knowledge. I have not time to go into the details, but the upshot is that I am pretty sure, from information received, that the civil man at the concert was Carswell. I more than suspect, that the paper was of importance, and I do believe that if my brother had been able to give it back, he might have been alive now. Therefore it occurs to me to ask you whether you have anything to put besides what I have told you. By way of answer, Dunnan had the episode in the manuscript room at the British Museum, they relate. And he did actually hand you some papers. Have you examined them? No? Because we must, if you'll allow, look at them at once, and very carefully. They went to the still empty house. Empty, for the two servants was not yet able to return to work. Dunnan's portfolio of papers was gathering dust on the writing table. In it was the quires, a small size scribbling paper which he used for his transcripts. And from one of these, as he took it up, there slipped and fluttered out into the room, with uncanny quickness, a strip of thin light paper. The windows was open, but Harrington slammed it to just in time to intercept the paper, which he caught. I thought so, he said. It might be the identical thing that was given to my brother. You'll have to look out, Dunning. This may mean something quite serious for you. A long consultation took place. The paper was narrowly examined. As Harrington had said, the characters on it were more like runes than anything else, but not decipherable by either man. Both hesitated to copy them for fear, as they confessed, of perpetuating whatever evil purpose they might conceal. So it has remained impossible, if I may anticipate a little, to ascertain what were conveyed in this curious message or commission. Both Dunning and Harrington are firmly convinced that it had the effect of bringing its possessor into a very undesirable company, that it must be returned to the source whence it came, and they was agreed, and further, that the only safe and certain way was that of personal service. And here contrivance would be necessary, for Dunning was known by sight of Carswell. He must, for one thing, alter his appearance by shaving his beard. But then might not the blow fall first? Harrington thought they could time it. He knew the date of the concert at which the black spot had been put on his brother. It was June 18th. The death had followed on September 18th. Dunning reminded him that 3 months had been mentioned on the inscription in the car window. Perhaps, he added with a cheerless laugh, mine may be a bill at 3 months too. I believe I can fix it up by my diary. Yes, April 23rd was the day at the museum. That brings us to July 23rd. Now you know, it becomes extremely important to me to know anything you will tell me about the progress of your brother's trouble, if it is possible for you to speak of it. Of course. Well, the sense of being watched whenever he was alone was the most distressing thing to him. After a time I took to sleeping in his room, and he was the better for it. Still, he talked a great deal in his sleep. What about? Is it wise to dwell on that, at least, before things are straightened out? I think not. But I can tell you this. 2 things came for him by post during those weeks, both with the London postmark and addressed in a commercial hand. One was a woodcut of Bearwicks, roughly torn out of the pages. One which shows a moonlit road and a man walking along it, followed by an awful demon creature. Under it were written lines out of the Ancient Mariner, which I suppose the cut illustrates, about one who, having once looked round, walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. The other was a calendar, such as tradesmen often send. My brother paid no attention to this, but I looked at it after his death, and found that everything after September 18th had been torn out. You may be surprised at his having gone out alone the evening he was killed, but the fact is, during the last 10 days or so of his life, he had been quite free from the scene of being followed, the sense of being followed or watched. The end of the consultation was this. Harrington, who knew a neighbour of Carswell's, thought he saw a way of keeping watch on his movements. It would be Dunning's part to be in readiness to try across Carswell's path at any moment, to keep the paper safe and in a place of ready access. They parted. The next week was no doubt a severe strain upon Dunning's nerves. The intangible barrier which had seemed to rise about him on the day which he received the paper gradually developed into a brooding blackness that cut him off from the means of escape, which one might have thought he might resort. No one was at hand who was likely to suggest them to him, and he seemed robbed of all initiative. He waited with inexpressible anxiety as May, June, and early July passed on, for a mandate from Aaron. All this time Carswell remained immovable at Lufford. And I'll pause here, because we are about 30 seconds from the ad break, which, as I know, sometimes comes and sometimes doesn't, but I'd hate for anyone to miss out on the story at this particular point. So I'll have a quick drink. I'll probably snooze it and try and finish out the story quicker, or before it was done, if I'm honest, but it's apparently got 0 out of 3 snoozes, so. And that'll be the ads on if there's ads. But for those of you who don't have the adverts, which again sometimes they don't come, and NASCAR of course I know is a subscriber, though he's only local. So let us talk to you for a minute and I'll give you some context. There's only a few pages from the end of the thing, so I won't do my full analysis. Instead, let's talk about the history of magic here as discussed, and the practice of alchemy. Something that I'm sort of more tangentially familiar with than yeah. And in particular I want to talk to you of runes, given that you, NASCAR specifically, who can still hear this, did manage to unlock a one. Let's go have a quick look at it. There it is, the little triangle there. Symbol of fire. I appreciate your clipping it. I couldn't see the clip the lamp made of it, but it doesn't keep me from watching things on Twitch, so I did come across it. I also sort of recognised it. Not this exact one, because I don't think this is that one, but if we go here to the library, no, you can't really make it out. Okay, let's go to yeah, this is a screen we aren't using at the minute. Let's go down for a bit and look at some things that I've worked on. Here we are, in fact perfectly right here. These is the wards, the main hub of the wards that are what Lamp uses to keep things out, and that's why we're here. Yeah, I don't think there's any other parts that are relevant to this, but if you come to this part where we first come, right here, below where I'm standing, you see there's a triangle with a line through it. Now you can't maybe tell just by looking at it, because obviously it's just a triangle as far as you're concerned. But I spent some time going up in between this triangle and the triangle up there. And it seems to me that for all that they aren't exactly the same, being slightly different in their size and construction and material, in fact look here, it's repeated again just here. Yeah, for all that they aren't exactly the same, they have the exact same proportions, these two triangles. The same angles. Now I'll measure that. Not perfectly equilateral, but quite close to it. Now obviously there's differences, it's oriented different, or that's oriented along the line of the rune, so I don't know if that means anything. And there's a line through it, so probably it means something slightly different. But it just struck me as interesting, you know? Nature of runes and all that. The changing of things. The working of power. Seem relevant. I figured you might want to know. Seeing as you're supposed to be learning magic and all that. I can't. Right, and we should be back. And having had our little discussion on the side, for those of you that could hear, I'll have a quick drink of water. Keep my throat wet. And then we'll press on. So, all this time Carswell remained immovable at Lufford. At last, in less than a week before the date he had come to look upon as the end of his earthly activities, it came a telegram. Leaves Victoria by boat train Thursday night. Do not miss. I come to you tonight. Harrington. He arrived accordingly, and they concocted plans. The train left Victoria at 9, and its last stop before Dover was Croydon West. Harrington would mark down Carswell at Victoria, and look out for Dunning at Croydon, calling on him if he need if need were, by a name agreed upon. Dunning, disguised as far as he might be, would have no label or initials of any hand on his luggage, and must at all costs have the paper with him. Dunning's suspense, as he waited on the Croydon platform, I need not attempt to describe. His sense of danger during the last days had only been sharpened by the fact that the cloud about him had perceptibly been lighter. But a relief were an ominous symptom, and, if Carswell eluded him now, hope were gone, and there were so many chances of that. The rumour of the journey might itself be a device. The 20 minutes in which he paced the platform and persecuted every porter with inquiries as to the boat train were as bitter as any he had spent. Still, the train come, and Harrington were at the window. Bitter important, of course. There should be no recognition. So Dunning got in at the farther end of the corridor carriage, and only gradually made his way to the compartment where Harrington and Carswell was. He was pleased, on the whole, to see that the train were far from full. Carswell was on the alert, but gave no sign of recognition. Dunning took the seat not immediately facing him, and attempted, vainly at first, and with increasing command of his faculties, to reckon the possibilities of making the desired transfer. Opposite to Carswell, and next to Dunning, was an heap of Carswell's coats on the seat. It would be of no use to slip the paper into these. It would not be safe, it would not feel so, unless in some way it could be proffered by him and accepted by the other. There was an handheld bag, open and with papers in it. Could he manage to conceal this, so that perhaps Carswell might leave the carriage without it, and then find and give it to him? That was the plan that suggested itself. If he could only have counselled with Harrington, that could not be. The minutes went on. More than once Carswell rose and went out into the corridor. The second time Dunham were on the point of attempting to make the bag fall off the seat, but he caught Harrington's eye and read in it a warning. Carswell, from the corridor, was watching, probably to see if the two men recognised each other. He returned, but reverently restless, and, when he rose a third time, hopes dawned, for something did slip off of his seat and fall with hardly a sound on the floor. Carswell went out once more and passed out of range of the corridor window. Dunham picked up what had fallen and saw that the key was in his hand in the form of one of Cook's ticket cases, with tickets in it. These cases have a pocket in the cover, and within very few seconds the paper, of which we have heard, were in the pocket of this one. To make the operation more secure, Harrington stood in the doorway of the compartment and fiddled with the blind. It was done, and done at the right time. The train was now slowing down towards Dover. In a moment more, Carswell re-entered the compartment. As he did so, Dunning, managing, he knew not how, to suppress the tremble in his voice, handed him the ticket case, saying, "May I give you this, sir? I believe it is yours." After a brief glance at the ticket inside, Carswell uttered the hoped-for response. "Yes, it is. Much obliged to you, sir." And he placed it in his breast pocket. Even in the few moments that remained, moments of tense anxiety, they knew not to what premature finding of the paper might lead, both men noticed that the carriage seemed to darken about them and to grow warmer. Carswell was fidgety and oppressed. He drew the heap of loose coats near to him and cast it back as if it repelled him, and he then sat upright and glanced anxiously at both. They, with sickening anxiety, busied themselves in collecting their belongings. They both thought that Carswell was on the point of speaking when the train stopped at Dover town. It was natural that they, in the short space between town and pier, they should both go into the corridor. At the pier they got out, but so empty was the train that they were forced to linger on the platform until Carswell should have passed ahead of them with his porter on the way to the boat, and only then were it safe for them to exchange a pressure of the hand and a word of concentrated gratitude, and of concentrated congratulations. The effect upon Dunham was to make him almost faint. Harrington made him lean up against the wall, while he himself went forward a few yards within sight of the gangway of the boat, on which Carswell had now arrived. The man at the head of it examined his ticket and, laden with coats, he passed down into the boat. Suddenly the official called after him, "Yes, sir, beg pardon, the other gentleman show you his ticket." "What the devil do you mean by the other gentleman?" Carswell's snarling voice called back from the deck. The man bent over and looked at him. "The devil? I don't know, I'm sure," Mr. Harrington heard him say to himself, and then aloud, "My mistake, sir, it must have been your lugs. I ask your pardon." And then to a subordinate near him, Had he got a dog with him or what? Funny thing, I could have swore he wasn't alone. Well, whatever it was, they left him to her aboard. She's off now. Another week and we shall be getting the holiday customers. In 5 minutes more there was nothing but the lessening lights of the boat, the long line of the Dover lamps, the night breeze and the moon. Long and long the two sat in their room at the Lord Warden. In spite of the removal of their greatest anxiety, they was oppressed with doubt not of the lightest. Had they been justified in sending a man that was deaf, as they believed he had? Or were they not to warn them at least? No, said Harrington. If he is the murderer I think him, we have done no more than is just. Still, if you think it better, how and where can you warn him? He was booked to Abbeville only, said Dunning. I saw that. If I wired to the hotel there in Joanne's guide, examine your ticket case, Dunning, I should feel happier. This is the 21st. He will have a day, but I'm afraid he has gone into the dark. The telegrams was left at the hotel office. It is not clear whether those reached their destination, where, if they did, they was understood. All that is known is that, on the afternoon of the 23rd, an English traveller, examining the front of St Wolfram's Church at Abbeville, then under extensive repairs, was struck on the head and instantly killed by a stone, fallen from the scaffold erected around the northwestern tower. There being, as was clearly proved, no workman on the scaffold at the moment, and the traveller's papers identified him as Mr. Carswell. Only one detail that shall be added. At Carswell's sale, a set of Berwicks sold. At Carswell's sale, a set of Berwicks, sold with all faults, was acquired by Harrington. The page with the woodcut of the traveller and the demon was, as he had expected, mutilated. Also, after a judicious interval, Harrington repeated to Dunning something of what he had heard his brother say in his sleep. But it was not long before Dunning stopped him. And that's the end of casting the runes. That was a good one. I really do like the M.R. Jameses. I'd like to do another one, but I think the problem is that was the shortest one of the three we've got, isn't it? Let me double check. Yeah, that one ran 33 pages. The next one runs. Oh no, I'm wrong. The next one only runs 21. That's not so bad. Yeah, we'll do another one then. We'll do the stalls at Barchester Cathedral. I'm up for it. If it had run longer than that, I probably would have called it because I don't want to be doing too late tonight. But yeah, I'm up for another one. But first, let's talk on this one. And first, before that, let me have a quick drink of water to keep my throat up. So, casting the runes. It's an interesting one. We have again a sort of strange one in, because this one is almost, how'd you put it, almost like a spell rather than an actual ghost. Despite these being called a collection of ghost stories. But it's a spell that sends something malevolent after a person. What do you call it? An evocation, I suppose, really. Maybe an invocation? I'm not entirely clear on the difference. But you have pretty clearly how this thing is laid out. You've got there's Mr. Carswell, who has some dabbling in witchcraft, as a sort of real sort, though no particular literary scholarship behind him. And he makes an habit of practicing this. When people he finds criticise him or go against his will, at least in terms of literary devices and his writings on the subject, he has no lack of will to send against them his familius, fetch, I don't know. I don't know the terms, but this creature against them. Which does seem to imply that he's some sort of powerful magician. And there's other stuff that would suggest that too as well. The what was it, the miracle lamp, whatever it was, which I don't remember the exact term not used, but I know what it's referring to. It's an old-fashioned sort of projector lamp. You basically like a modern film projector. Basically, you'd have the light that shined against the screen, but rather than rolls of film, you'd have stained glass basically that would go through into the slot in front of it and project an image. And as you change them out, you'd have a sort of story played out in scenes, which would generally be narrated by a storyteller. and had these particularly miraculous ones, which imply some level of craft or connection that adds to that impression. But at the same time, this isn't a small event for him. I mean, you can tell from the way that he sort of gloats about it. He takes special care to put this advertisement in place, foretelling what's going to happen. And he sends the calendar and the woodcut and all this. It's an event for him to be doing this. It's not a casual thing. So he's powerful and he's dangerous, but he's not like an sorcerer or nothing. Not immune to his own thing. And of course, when the actual material of his spell is sent back to him, the thing that he sent after the fact, the man, is called to him in turn. It's strange, really. Another thing that strikes me strange is that the set of runes went to the first man, Harrington. They went into the fire, carried by a warm breeze, which one can only presume was this creature's doing, given that a warm breeze was felt in Dunning's house the night that he had the run-in with the mouth. So it can in some way do this. But generally speaking, fire is sort of a purifying thing. Burning the thing might come up quite often in tropes of this sort as a way of dispelling or destroying a spell. But here it is the undoing of the thing, because there's no substance left to it. So it's not actually the physical mark that's important. It's sort of some intangible idea of it, of possession. And indeed, in the end, they sort of are obsessed with the idea of not slipping it to him, but giving it to him in some way that he accepts. So in some way you have to accept possession of it too. In the same way that Harrington accepted the program, or Dunn accepted the return of his papers. You have to claim ownership of the marker. It's interesting mechanically. Again, I don't know much about the actual workings of magic. But again, these books is in, how'd you put it? These is in the magical section, right? The low-level magical section for people just beginning, but there's something to them. And this one in particular is one of the powered ones, so there's something to that as well. It's interesting. It really is interesting. But yeah, like I said, I like that one. I don't think I've got too much more to say about it. So, I'll have another second cheeky drink of water, keep myself good and ready, and then we'll press on. The stalls of Barchester Cathedral. Right then. The stalls of Barchester Cathedral. This matter began, as far as I am concerned, with a reading of a notice in the obituary section of the Gentleman's Magazine from an early year in the 19th century. On February 26th, at his residence in the Cathedral Close of Barchester, the Venerable John Benmoynes, D.D., aged 57, Archdeacon of Surbridge and Rector of Picklehill and Candley, he was of College, Cambridge, and where, by talent and assiduity, he commanded the esteem of his seniors. When, as the usual time, he took his first degree, his name stood high in the list of wranglers. His academical honours procured for him, within short time, a fellowship of his college. In the year 1783, he received holy orders, and he was shortly afterwards presented to the perpetual curacy of Rankston sub Ash by his friend and patron, the late truly venerable Bishop of Lichfield. His speedy preferments, first to prebend and subsequently to the dignity of precentor in the Cathedral of Barchester, form an eloquent testimony to the respect in which he were held, and to his eminent qualifications. He succeeded to the archdeaconry upon the sudden decease of Archdeacon Pulteney in 1810. His sermons, ever comfortable in the principles of the religion and church, which he adorned, displayed in no ordinary degree, without the least trace of enthusiasm, the refinement of the scholar united with the graces of the Christian. Free from sectarian violence, and informed by the spirits of the truest charity, they will long dwell in the memories of his hearers. Here a further omission. The productions of his pen include an able defence of episcopacy, which, though often perused by the author of this tribute to his memory, afford but one additional instance of the want of liberality and enterprise, which is too common a characteristic of the publishers of our generation. His published works are indeed confined to a spirited and elegant version of the Argonautica of Valerius Flacius, a volume of discourses upon the several events in the life of Joshua, delivered in his cathedral, and a number of the charges which he pronounced at various visitations to the clergy of his archdeaconry. These are distinguished by etc., etc. The urbanity and hospitality of the subject of these lines will not readily be forgotten by those who enjoyed his acquaintance. His interest in the venerable and awful pile under whose hoary vault he was so punctual and attendant, and particularly in the musical portion of its rites, might be termed filial, and formed a strong and delightful contrast to the polite indifferences displayed by too many of our cathedral dignitaries at the present time. The final paragraph, after informing us that Dr. Haynes died as a bachelor, says, "It might have been augured that an existence so placid and benevolent would have been terminated in a ripe old age by the dissolution equally gradual and calm. But how unsearchable are the workings of Providence! A peaceful and retired seclusion amid which the honoured evening of Dr. Haynes' life were mellowing in its close, were destined to be disturbed, nay shattered, by a tragedy as appalling as it was unexpected. The morning of the 26th of February. But perhaps I should do better to keep back the remainder of the narrative, until I have told the circumstances which led up to it. These, as far as they are now accessible, I have derived from another source. I have read the obituary notices which I have been quoting quite by chance, along with a great many others of the same period. It excited some little speculation in my mind, but beyond thinking that if I ever had an opportunity of examining the local records of the period indicated, I would try to remember Dr. Haynes, I made no effort to pursue his case. Quite lately, I was cataloguing the manuscripts in the library of the college to which he belonged. I have reached the end of the number of volumes on the shelves, and I proceeded to ask the librarian whether there were any more books which he thought I ought to include in my description. "I don't think there are," he said, "but we had better come and look at the manuscript class and make sure. Have you time to do that now?" I had time. We went to the library, checked off the manuscripts, and at the end of our survey arrived at a shelf on which I had seen nothing. Its contents consisted, for the most part, of sermons, bundles of fragmentary papers, college exercises, Cyrus, an epic poem and several cantos, the product of a country clergyman's leisure, mathematical tracts by a deceased professor, and other similar material of a kind with which I am only too familiar. I took brief notes of these. Lastly, there were a tin box, which were pulled out and dusted. Its label, much faded, was thus inscribed: "Papers of the Venerable Archdeacon Haynes, bequeathed in 1834 by his sister, Miss Letitia Haynes." I knew at once that the name was one which I had somewhere encountered, and could very soon locate it. That must be the Archdeacon Haynes who came to a very odd end at Barchester. I've read his obituary in the Gentleman's Magazine. Will I take the box home? Do you know if there's anything interesting in it? The librarian were very willing that I should take the box and examine it at leisure. "I never looked inside it myself," he said, "but I've always been meaning to. I'm pretty sure that it is the box which our old master once said ought never to have been accepted by the college. He said that to Martin years ago. And he said also that as long as he had control over the library, it should never be opened. Martin told me about it. He said that he wanted terribly to know what was in it. But master was librarian and always kept the box in the lodge, so there was no getting at it in his time, and when he died it was taken away by mistake by his heirs, and only returned a few years ago. I can't think why I haven't opened it. But as I have to go away from Cambridge this afternoon, you had better have first go at it. I think I can trust you to publish anything not to trust to publish anything undesirable in our catalogue." I took the box home and examined its contents, and thereafter consulted the librarian as to what should be done about publication, and, since I have his leave to make a story out of it, provided I disguise the identity of the people concerned, we'll try what can be done. The materials are, of course, mainly journals and letters. How much I shall quote and how much epitomise must be determined by considerations of space. The proper understanding of the situation has necessitated a little, not very arduous, research, which has been greatly facilitated by the excellent illustrations and texts of the Barchester volume in Bell's Cathedral series. When you enter the choir of Barchester Cathedral now, you pass through a screen of metal and coloured marbles, designed by Sir Gilbert Scott, and find yourself in what I must call a very bare and odiously furnished place. The stalls is modern, without canopies. The places of the dignitaries and the names of the prebends have fortunately been allowed to survive. It is inscribed on small brass plates affixed to the stalls. The organ is in the triforium, and what is seen of the case is Gothic. The reredos and its surroundings are like every other. Careful engravings of 100 years ago show a very different state of things. The organ is on a massive classical screen. The stalls is also classical and very massive. There is a baldaccio or wood over the altar, with urns upon its corners. Further east is a solid altar screen, classical in design, or wood, with a pediment in which a triangle is surrounded by rays, enclosing certain Hebrew letters in gold. Cherubs contemplate these. There is a pulpit with a great sounding board at the eastern end of the stall on the north side, and there is a black and white marble pavement. Two ladies and a gentleman are admiring the general effect. From other sources I gather that the Archdeacon's stall then, as now, were next to the Bishop's throne at the south-eastern end of the stalls. His house almost faces the west front of the church, and is a fine red brick building of William III's time. Here Dr. Haynes, already a mature man, took up his abode with his sister in the year 1810. The dignity had long been the object of his wishes, but his predecessor refused to depart until he had attained the age of 92. About a week after he had held a modest festival in celebration of that 92nd birthday, there came a morning, late in the year, when Dr. Haynes, hurrying cheerfully into his breakfast room, rubbing his hands and humming a tune, were greeted and checked in his genial flow of spirits by the sight of his sister, seated indeed, in her usual place behind the tea urn, bowed forward and sobbing unrestrainedly into her handkerchief. "What? What is the matter? What bad news?" he began. "Oh, Johnny, you've not heard. The poor dear Archdeacon." "The Archdeacon, yes? What is it? Ill, is he?" No. They found him on the staircase this morning. It is so shocking." "Is it possible? Dear. What Pulteney? Had there been any seizure?" "They don't think so. And this is almost the worst thing about it. It seems to have been all the fault of that stupid maid of theirs, Jane." Dr. Haynes paused. "I don't quite understand, Letitia. How is the maid at fault?" "Why, as far as I can make out, there was a stair rod missing, and she never mentioned it. The poor Archdeacon set his foot quite on the edge of the step. You know how slippery that oak is. And it seems he must have fallen almost the whole flight and broken his neck. It is so sad for poor Miss Pulteney. Of course they will get rid of the girl at once. I never liked her." Miss Haynes' grief resumed its sway, but eventually relaxed so far as to permit her of her taking some breakfast. Not so her brother, who, after standing in silence before the window for some minutes, left the room and did not appear again that morning. I'm going to quickly take a drink here, as my throat is drying quite rather faster than usual today. I need only add that the careless maidservant was dismissed forthwith, but the missing stair rod was very shortly afterwards found under the stair carpet, an additional proof, if any was needed, of extreme stupidity and carelessness on our part. For a good many years Dr. Haynes had been marked out by his ability, which seems to have been really considerable, as the likely successor of Archdeacon Pulteney, and no disappointment were in store for him. He was duly installed, and entered with zeal upon the discharge of those functions which are appropriate to one in his position. A considerable space in his journal was occupied with exclamations upon the confusion which Archdeacon Pulteney had left the business of his office and the documents appertaining to it. Dues upon Ringham and Barneswood had been uncollected for something like 12 years, and are largely irrecoverable. No visitation has been held for 7 years. 4 chancels are almost past mending. The persons deputised by the Archdeacon have been nearly as incapable as himself. It were almost a matter for thankfulness that the state of things had not been permitted to continue, and a letter from a friend confirms this view. Gedizode, it says, in rather cool allusion to the second epistle to the Thessalonians, is removed at last, my poor friend. Upon what a scene of confusion will you be entering? I give you my word that on the last occasion of my crossing his threshold, there was no single paper that he could lay hands upon, no syllable of mine that he could hear, and no fact in connection with my business that he could remember. But now, thanks to a negligent maid and a loose stair carpet, there is some prospect that necessary business will be transpired without a complete loss alike of voice and temper. This letter was tucked into a pocket of the cover of one of the diaries. There could be no doubt of the new Archdeacon's zeal and enthusiasm. Give him time to recover some semblance of order of the innumerable errors and complications with which I am confronted, and I shall gladly and sincerely join with the aged Israelite in the canticle which too many, I fear, pronounce but with their lips. This reflection I found, not in a diary, but a letter. The doctor's friend seemed to have returned this correspondence to his surviving. Always there's one. The doctor's friend seemed to return this correspondence to his surviving sister. He does not confine himself, however, to reflections. His investigations of the rights and duties of his office are very searching and businesslike, and there is calculation in one place that a period of 3 years will just suffice to set the business of the Archdeaconry upon a proper footing. The estimate appears to have been an exact one. For just 3 years he is occupied in reforms. While looking in vain at the end of that time for the promised nunc dimittis, he has now found a new sphere of activity. Hitherto his duties have precluded him from more than an occasional attendance at the cathedral services. Now he begins to take an interest in the fabric and the music. Upon his struggles with the organist, an old gentleman who had been in office since 1786, I have no time to dwell. It was not attended with any marked success. More to the purpose is his sudden growth of enthusiasm for the cathedral itself and its furniture. There is a draft of a letter to Sylvanus Urban, which I do not think were ever sent, describing the stalls in the choir. As I said, these was a fairly late date, of about the year 1700 in fact. The Archdeacon's stall, situated at the south-east end, west of the episcopal throne, now so worthily occupied by the truly excellent prelate who adorns the see of Barchester, is distinguished by some curious ornamentation. In addition to the arms of Dean West, by whose efforts the whole of the internal furniture of the choir was completed, the prayer desk is terminated at the eastern extremity by 3 small but remarkable statuettes, in a grotesque manner. One is an exquisitely modelled figure of a cat, whose crouching posture suggests, with admirable spirit, the suppleness, vigilance, and craft of the redoubled adversary of the genius Mus. Opposite to this is a figure seated upon a throne, and invested with the attributes of royalty. But it is no earthly monarch whom the carver has sought to portray. His feet are studiously concealed by the long robe in which he is draped, but neither the crown nor the cap which he wears suffice to hide the prick ears and curving horns, which betray his Tartarian origin, and the hands which rest upon his knees is armed with talons of horrifying length and sharpness. Between these two figures stands a shape muffled in a long mantle. This might at first sight be mistaken for a monk or friar of the Orders Grey, but his head is cowled and a knotted cord depends from somewhere about his waist. A slight inspection, however, will lead to a very different conclusion. The knotted cord is quickly seen to be a halter held by a hand all but concealed within the draperies, while the sunken features and, horror to relate, the rent flesh upon the cheekbones proclaim the king of terrors. These figures are evidently the production of no one skilled to chisel, and should it chance that any of your correspondents are able to throw light upon their origin and significance, my obligations to your valuable miscellany will be largely increased. There is more description in the paper, and, seeing the woodwork in question has now disappeared, it has a considerable interest. A paragraph at the end is worth quoting. Some late researches among the chapter accounts have shown me that the carvings of the stalls was not, as was very usually reported, the work of Dutch artists, and was executed by a native of the city or district named Austin. The timber was procured from an oak copse in the vicinity, the property of the dean and chapter, known as Hollywood. Upon a recent visit to the parish within whose boundaries it is situated, I learned from the aged and truly respectable incumbent that traditions still lingered among the inhabitants of the great size and age of the oaks employed to furnish the materials of the stately structure, which has been, however, imperfectly described in the above lines. One in particular, which stood near the centre of the grove, It is remembered that it was known as the Hanging Oak. The propriety of that title is confirmed by the fact that a quantity of human bones was found in the soil about its roots, and that at a certain time of year it was the custom for those who wished to secure a successful issue to their affairs, whether of love or of the ordinary business of life, to suspend from its boughs small images or puppets, rudely fashioned of straw and twigs or the like rustic materials. So much for the Archdeacon's archaeological investigations. To return to his career as it is to be gathered from his diaries. Those of his first 3 years of hard and careful work show him throughout in high spirits, and doubtless, during this time, that reputation for hospitality and urbanity, which is mentioned in his obituary, notice, were well deserved. After that, as time goes on, I see a shadow coming over him, destined to develop into utter blackness, which I cannot but think must have been reflected in his outward demeanour. He commits a good deal of his fears and troubles to his diary. There was no other outlet for him. He was unmarried, and his sister were not always with him. But I am much mistaken if he has told all that he might have told. A series of extracts shall be given. August 30th, 1816. The days begin to draw in more perceptibly than ever. Now that the archdeaconry papers are reduced to order, I must find some further employment for the evening hours of autumn and winter. It is a great blow that Letitia's health will not allow her to stay through these months. When I had gone on with my defiance of episcopacy, it may be useful. September 15th. Letitia has left me for Brighton. October 11th. Candles lit in the choir for the first time at evening prayer. It came as a shock. I find that I absolutely shrink from the dark season. November 17th. Much struck by the character of the carving on my desk. I do not know that I had ever carefully noticed it before. My attention was called to it by an accident. During the magnificent I was, I regret to say, almost overcome with sleep. My hand was resting on the back of the carved figure of a cat, which is the nearest to me of the 3 figures on the end of my stool. I was not aware of this, for I was not looking in that direction, until I was startled by what seemed a softness, a feeling as of rather rough and coarse fur, and a sudden movement, as if the creature were twisting round its head to bite me. I regained complete consciousness in an instant, and I have some idea that I must have uttered a suppressed exclamation, for I noticed that Mr. Treasurer turned his head quickly in my direction. The impression of the unpleasant feeling was so strong that I found myself rubbing my hand upon my surplice. This accident led me to examine the figures after prayers more carefully than I had done before, and I realized for the first time with what skill they are executed. December 6th. I do indeed miss Letitia's company. The evenings after I have worked as long as I considered my defence are very trying. The house is too large for a lonely man, and visitors of any kind are too rare. I get an uncomfortable impression when going to my room that there is company of some kind. The fact is, I may as well formulate it to myself, that I hear voices. This, I am well aware, is a common symptom of incipient decay of the brain, and I believe that I should be less disquieted than I am if I had any suspicions this was the cause. I have none whatever, nor is there anything in my family history to give colour to such an idea. Work, diligent work, and a punctual attention to the duties which fall to me is my best remedy, and I have little doubt that it will prove efficacious. January 1st. My trouble is, I must confess it, increasing upon me. Last night, upon my return after midnight from the deanery, I lit my candle to go upstairs. I was nearly at the top when something whispered to me, "Let me wish you a happy New Year." I could not be mistaken. It spoke distinctly, and with a peculiar emphasis. Had I dropped my candle, as I all but did, I trembled to think what the consequences must have been. As it was, I managed to get up the last flight, and was quickly in my room with the door locked, and experienced no other disturbance. January 15th. I had occasion to come downstairs last night to my workroom for my watch, which I had inadvertently left on my table when I went up to bed. I think I was at the top of the last flight when I had a sudden impression of a sharp whisper in my ear. "Take care." I clutched at the baluster and naturally looked around at once. Of course there was nothing. After a moment I went on. There was no good turning back, but I had as nearly as possible fallen. A cat, a large one by the feel of it, slipped between my feet, but again, of course, I saw nothing. It may have been the kitchen cat, but I do not think it was. February 27th. A curious thing last night, which I should like to forget. Perhaps if I put it down here, I may see it in true proportion. I worked in the library from about 9 to 10. The hall and staircase seemed to be unusually full of what I can only call movement without sound. By this I mean that there seemed to be continuous going and coming, and that whenever I ceased writing to listen or looked out in the hall, the stillness was absolutely unbroken. Not, in going to my room at an earlier hour than usual, at 10:30, was I conscious of anything I could call a noise. It so happened that I had told John to come to my room for the letter to the bishop, which I wished to have delivered early in the morning. At the palace. He was to sit up, therefore, and come for it when he heard me retire. This I had for the moment forgotten, though I remembered to carry the letter with me to my room. When, as I was winding up my watch, I heard a little tap at my door, and a low voice saying, "May I come in?" which I most undoubtedly did hear, I recollected the fact, and took up the letter from my dressing table, saying, "Certainly, come in." No one, however, answered my summons, and it was now that I strongly suspect I committed an error, for I opened the door and held the letter out. There was certainly no one at that moment in the passage, but, in the instant of my standing there, the door at the end opened, and John appeared carrying a candle. I asked him whether he had come to the door earlier, and am satisfied that he had not. I do not like the situation. Although my senses were very much on the alert, and though it was some time before I could sleep, I must allow that I perceived nothing further of an untoward character. With the return of spring, when his sister came to live with him for some months, Dr. Ain's entries become more cheerful, and indeed no symptom of depression is discernible until the early parts of September, when he was again left alone. And now indeed there is evidence that he were incommoded again, and that more pressingly. To this matter I will return in a moment, but I digress to put in a document which, rightly or wrongly, I believe to have a bearing on the thread of the story. The account books of Dr. Ain's, preserved along with his other papers, show, from a date but a little later than that of his institution as Archdeacon, a quarterly payment of £25 to J.L. Nothing could have been made of this had it stood by itself, but I connect with it the very dirty and ill-written letter, which, like another that I have quoted, was in a pocket of the cover of a diary. With date or postmark there is no vestige, and the decipherment were not easy. It appears to run, "Dr. Sir, I have been expecting to hear of you these last weeks, and not having done so, must suppose you have not got mine, which was saying how me and my man had met in with bad times this season. All seems to go cross with us on the farm, and which was to look for the rent we have no knowledge of it. This been the sad case with us. If you would have the great liberality, probably but with the exact spelling defies reproduction, to send £40, otherwise steps will have to be took, which I should not wish. As you was the means of me losing my place with Dr. Podney, I think it is only just what I am asking, and you know best what I could say if I was put to it, but I do not wish anything of that unpleasant nature, being one that always wished to have everything pleasant about me. Your obedient servant, Jane Lee." About the time at which I suppose this letter to have been written, there is, in fact, a payment of £40 to J.L. We return to the diary. October 22nd. At evening prayers during the Psalms, I had that same experience which I recollect from last year. I was resting my hand on one of the carved figures below, as before. I usually avoid that of the cat now. I usually avoid that of the cat now, and I was going to have said, a change came over it, but that seems attributing too much importance to what must, after all, be due to some physical effects in myself. At any rate, the wood seemed to become chilly and soft, as if made of wet linen. I can assign the moment at which I became sensible of this. The choirs were singing the words, "Set thou an ungodly man to be ruler over him, and let Satan stand at his right hand." The whispering in my house was more persistent tonight. I seemed not to be rid of it in my room. I have not noticed this before. A nervous man, which I am not, and hope I am not becoming, would have been much annoyed, if not alarmed, by it. The cat was on the stairs tonight. I think it sits there always. There is no kitchen cat. November 15th. Here again I must note a matter I do not understand. I am much troubled in sleep. No definite image presented itself, but I was pursued by the very vivid impression that wet lips were whispering into my ear with great rapidity and emphasis for some time together. After this I suppose I fell asleep, but was awakened with a start by a feeling as if a hand were laid on my shoulder. To my intense alarm I found myself standing at the top of the lowest flight of the first staircase. The moon was shining brightly enough through the large window to let me see that there was a large cat on the second or third step. I can make no comment. I crept up to bed again, I do not know how. Yes, mine is a heavy burden. There follows a line or two which has been scratched out. I fancy I read something like, "Acted for the best." Not long after this, it is evident to me that the Archdeacon's firmness began to give way under the pressure of these phenomena. I omit as unnecessary, painful and distressing the ejaculations and prayers which, in the months of December and January, appear for the first time and become increasingly frequent. Throughout this time, however, he is obstinate in clinging to his point. Why he did not plead ill health and take refuge at Bath or Brighton, I cannot tell. My impression is that it would have done him no good. That he was a man who, if he had confessed himself beaten by the annoyances, would have succumbed at once. They were conscious of this. He did seek to palliate them by inviting visitors to his house. The results he has noted in this fashion. January 7th. I have prevailed on my cousin Alan to give me a few days, and he is to occupy the chamber next to mine. January 8th. A still night. Alan slept well, but complained of the wind. My own experiences were as before, still whispering and whispering. What is it that he wants to say? January 9th. Alan thinks it's a very noisy house. He thinks too that my cat is an unusually large and fine specimen, very wild. January 10th. Alan and I in the library until 11. He left me twice to see what the maids were doing in the hall. Returning the second time, he told me he had seen one of them passing through the door at the end of the passage, and said as if his wife was here, she would soon get them into better order. I asked him what coloured dress the maid wore. He said grey or white. I supposed it would be so. January 11th. Alan left me today. I must be firm. These words, "I must be firm," occur again and again on subsequent days. Sometimes there is the only entry. In these cases there is in an unnaturally a large hand, dug into the paper in a way which must have broken the pen that wrote them. Apparently the Archdeacon's friends did not remark any change in his behaviour, and this gives me an idea of his courage and determination. A diary tells us nothing more than I have indicated of the last days of his life. The end of it all must be told in the polished language of the obituary notice. The morning of the 26th of February were cold and tempestuous. An early hour the servants had occasion to go into the front hall of the residence occupied by the lamented subject of these lines. What was their horror upon observing the form of their beloved and respected master lying upon the landing of the principal staircase, in an attitude which inspired the gravest fears. Assistants were procured, and universal consternation were experienced upon the discovery that he had been the object of a brutal and murderous attack. The vertebral column were fractured in more than one place. This might have been the result of a fall. It appeared that the stair couple were loosened at one point, but, in addition to this, there was injuries inflicted upon the eyes, nose and mouth, as if by the agency of some savage animal which, dreadful to relate, render those features unrecognisable. The vital spark was, it is needless to add, completely extinct, and had been so, upon the testimony of respectable medical authorities, for several hours. The author or authors of this mysterious outrage is alike buried in mystery, The most active conjecture has hitherto failed to suggest a solution of the melancholic problem afforded by this appalling coincidence. The writer goes on to reflect upon the probability that the writings of Mr. Shelby, Lord Byron, and Monsieur Voltaire may have been instrumental in bringing about the disaster, and concludes by opening somewhat vaguely that this event may operate as an example to the rising generation. But this portion of his remarks need not be quoted in full. I had already formed the conclusion that Dr. Ains were responsible for the death of Dr. Pulteney, but the incident connected with the carved figure of death upon the Archdeacon's stall were a very perplexing feature. The conjecture that it had been cut out of the wood of the hanging oak was not difficult, but seemed impossible to substantiate. However, I paid a visit to Barchester, partially with a view of finding out whether there was any relics of the woodwork to be heard of. I was introduced by one of the canons to the curator of the local museum, who was, my friend said, more likely to be able to give me information on the point than anyone else. I told the gentleman of the description of certain carved figures and arms formerly on the stalls, and asked whether any had survived. He was able to show me the arms of Dean West and some other fragments. These, he said, had been got from an old resident who had also once owned a figure, perhaps one of those which I was inquiring for. There was a very odd thing about that figure, he said. The old man who had it told me he picked it up in a wood yard, whence he had obtained the still extant pieces, and had taken it home for his children. On the way home he was fiddling about with it, and came to in his hands, and a bit of paper dropped out. This he picked up, and, just noting that there was writing on it, put it into his pocket, and subsequently into a vase on his mantelpiece. I was at his house not very long ago, and happened to pick up the vase and turn it over to see whether there were any marks on it, and the paper fell into my hands. The old man, on my handing it to him, told me the story I have told you, and said I might keep the paper. It was crumpled and rather torn, so I have mounted on a card which I have here. If you can tell me what it means, I shall be very glad, and also, I may say, a good deal surprised. He gave me the card. The paper was quite legibly inscribed in an old hand, and this is what were on it. When I grew in the woods, I was watered with blood. Now in the church I stand. Who that touches me with his hand, if a bloody hand he bear, I'll counsel him to beware, lest he be fetched away, where by night or day, and chiefly when the wind blows high, in the night of February. This I dreamt, 26 Feb, 1699. John Austin. I suppose it is a charm or spell. Wouldn't you call it something of that kind? Said the curator. Yes, I said. I suppose one might. What became of the figure in which it was concealed? Oh, I forgot, said he. The old man told me it was so ugly and frightened his children so much that he burnt it. That's the end of the stalls of Barchester Cathedral. Well then, let's be moving back over to, to a little bit more comfortable place to discuss it. What do we have here that is of interest to us then? Well, first things first, we have another sort of cursed object. They seem to come up a lot in M.R. James's stuff. Not always, but frequently. And even in the Cast in the Runes, you could sort of argue the paper with the runes on it served the role of that cursed object, really. He likes to have something tangible attached to his magical objects, does it, James? Or maybe it's just the accounts that he found seem more credible to him if they had a tangible thing, because I'm still not convinced these is entirely fictional. But yeah, we've got the cursed object, in this case quite a large one. The stalls of the cathedral, and these three figures carved into part of it. And we have a nice little written curse with damnation upon it. Or whether it's specifically to... It's odd really, it specifically calls out a time in February, and there's no other accounts seemingly connected to the case of other men dying of it. So whether it is a portent of doom specifically for the single bishop who died of it, or if it is just a general portent of doom that is only really kind of found by this bishop, I suppose is to be questioned. Well, it's pretty obvious that he murdered the previous archdeacon. Whether for just reasons just to care of the church and the like, or whether because he coveted the position for himself. There's really no point in speculating, I think. I'm going to have a quick drink now while I remember at the throat. Yeah, no point in speculating, I think, but if he did it for selfless reasons, no doubt there was still some temptation for the position. And if he did it for the position, it's still not worth arguing that he didn't improve the state of things, by all accounts. Still, he committed the sin of murder, which, as far as sins in the Christian tradition go, is pretty up there. One of the big 10. And presumably he did not confess of it to anyone. I don't actually know. I know that in the tradition of at least the Catholic Church, confession is kept in private, but well, I suppose this wouldn't be the Catholic Church anyway, it would be the Anglican Church. I guess maybe there's no institution of confession. And even if there is, I'm not sure if there's someone high up in the sort of rankings as an archdeacon can confess to. Was the archdeacon or was the archbishop? I forgot. Archbishop, I think. But, yeah. It's not really anyone higher than the thing you can confess to. I mean, I know that the Archbishop of Canterbury stands above the others as head of the church, and above him theoretically the monarch of England. So I guess maybe you could have gone to one of them, but yeah. So it's an unconfessed sin, and that's unforgivable. It's strange, really. And then there's the haunting. It is interesting. He's haunted by these figures. I don't know. There's something to these figures. I can't quite sort of get my head around. There's a symbology to them. I mean, obviously 3 is a pretty significant number. But you have the cat and you have the king, and then the man in the robe is sort of, how'd you put it? I take him to be an executioner or an hangman in my mind. The rope held close to him, knotted. And the hanging tree, of course. And I'm sure there's some symbology you could draw from them. The monarch representing the law that condemns a man. The animal representing the bloodlust that drives men to kill. And the hangman who does the deed. Or maybe there's not. I don't know. Maybe things isn't always that clean. But you have this pretty clear sort of sequence of events. He murders the bishop. He touches these cursed things that are part of this sacred church. And he becomes haunted by the spirits. Seemingly first the one of the cat, which whispers a little bit and tries to trip her on the stair. Then the hangman, who becomes more insistent and louder. I'd heard at some point that he would touch the third figure, and that would be what would lead to his finally being overcome. But maybe not. And obviously, if this is from accounts, then it's no way of getting the full story, is there? But yeah. It's an odd one, really. The account of, I mean, the wood itself does seem quite significant to me. Holy wood. When I first said the word holy wood, I was thinking, oh, is this something that used to be sacred to someone else? Has there been a sin done by the taking it down? But it seems almost the opposite. The wood we used properly, cut properly. The tree, while an hanging tree, were a just hanging tree. It done the job of punishing the wicked. And so by the making of this thing, it became not an unholy object or even a cursed one, but an holy object, or a vile one. One you might call cursed, I suppose. An object designed around the punishment of the wicked, that did him to death, deserved or otherwise. That's not like religious objects, isn't it exactly, well, isn't sometimes guilty of bloody-mindedness in their action, though. It's an odd thing too. Can a part of an object be cursed? When these stalls were taken out of the church, the cathedral I should say, does that mean the building itself is clean now? Was only the stalls cursed? Was even the old stalls cursed? Maybe it was just the figurines. And these figurines being built in a part of it, does that mean they're extensions of the object? That they become the object? Or is it just them themselves, even though they're built into a greater one? The mechanics is unclear. But the theme is pretty clear, I suppose. Guilt, punishment, retribution, probably some aspect of Christian doctrine in the church and that. Quite shocking for a man who would arise to be an archbishop to have committed such a murder. And conspiracy to do it as well, and paying off his accomplice and all. A real scandal. We're about to have ads. And since we are about to have ads, I suppose, I don't have a lot more to say really. I could go on about a couple of other little points, but instead let's say that's about the end of it really. So thank you all for coming around and watching and listening to this story. I do genuinely appreciate it, and I hope you've enjoyed it. We've gone about 2 hours, which is pretty good. But yeah, I don't... Twitch is telling me there's only one viewer, which I know is untrue. I continue to have problems with this. So I won't raid out, because I hate to raid out seeming like that. And I don't know if anyone's out. Well, there's no one even really do raid anyway, so I'll just call it. But yeah, I thank you all for watching. As the ads is about to start, I shall say quite quickly, ta-ra, I wish you a good evening.